And the trouble is, job creation is so slow, it will be years before we get back the 7.5 million jobs lost in the Great Recession.
Shining a spotlight on a brutal warlord in Africa, Joseph Kony. It was posted on Monday, and as of this moment, it has been seen nearly 40 million
2010
times.
has already been a disastrous year for Haiti, when a cholera epidemic erupted a few weeks ago. It's killed over 750.
Yeah, interesting title for a series. You might be able to sort of pick up from sort of the set that's behind me, the song that we just did at all campuses, Follow You, and those scriptures that were coming up, and then that little video might give you an idea of where we're going in this series. I want to literally spend most of our time today setting that up, laying the foundation for what this series, Reclaiming Justice, is all about. But first, let me start with a story. So, for our wedding, my parents got, Tina and I, gave us a honeymoon cruise to Bermuda. Unbelievable, right? Great deal. So it'll be 25 years this August that remarkably, my high school sweetheart and Still Valley homecoming queen said I do to me. 25 years ago, we went on this cruise, right? And, sure, fire up for that. So we went on this cruise, and seated next to us at dinner on the cruise was another couple that was on their honeymoon. I don't remember a lot about them. I remember that his name was Hutch, and that he was the lead cameraman for Monday Night Football. And I thought that was really like a cool job. I also, they didn't flaunt this, or they didn't show it, or they didn't talk about it, but it was very clear to us they had a lot of cash. I mean, just by her jewelry and the things they talked about and the things they do, they were loaded. I mean, they had a lot of money. So, on the very first night, the program director of the cruise steps up, and he puts this big table up for us all at dinner, and on it are these 6 big metal horses on these stands. And he tells us that we're going to play this game, but tonight, anybody can bid on these horses. And the winner of the bid gets to keep the horse, carry it around with them all week long, name the horse, and then on the final night of the cruise, in a game of dice, you're going to chase, these horses are going to race, and the winning horse, they get to keep all of the money that was bid on the 6 horses. And there was also, I guess, going to be an opportunity for us to put a little wager down on any horse we wanted. Well, I'm thinking, I'm like telling Tina, that sounds like fun, What do you think, huh? Bid on a horse, it's like we're on a honeymoon. Let's bid on a horse. So the program director, auctioneer, stands up. Okay, we're going to bid on this first horse, and we're going to open with $1,000. I'm like, well, I'm out. So that's not it. But Hutch is in. I mean, I can tell this guy wants a horse. And so the 1,000, he's like 1,000. Somebody in the back of the room, 1,100, 1,200. Somebody over here, 1,400, 1,500. It's clear he's going to go up 100 and just keep beating anybody till he gets this horse. It comes down to there's just 2 of them left, and they're bidding. And this thing is up 2,000, 2,800, 2,900, 3,100. He just keeps upping 100. Anytime this one guy would go up 100, he'd go up 100. And he elbows me. He says, watch this. I'm going to see if this guy really wants to stay in his lane. And the auctioneer goes, 3,200. And that guy goes, 3,200. And Hutch says, 5,200. And the guy folds. And he goes, see? He didn't want to get in my lane with me. Now, I remember that he named his horse Lady Madonna. And I don't even know if it won that night. But for whatever that staying in your lane comment stuck with me. There are times in life that we need to stay in our lane, right? In fact, we can get into a lot of trouble sometimes when we get out of our lane. Financially, you may want a certain car or a nice big house, but if you can't afford the payments, you should have stayed in your lane, right? If you ever watch like American Idol on the first few nights of the new season, there's a lot of people that think that they are the next American Idol. They should have stayed in their lane, right? I mean, because they end up just making fun of them the whole time. You know, I love the car cruise. It's at our Wexford campus on Friday nights. Actually, this Friday kicks off the very first one. If you've never been there, 1,000, sometimes 1,500 show cars. I mean, these are unbelievable cars that show up at this car cruise. And I'm not a car buff at all, but I'm always intrigued by that one guy, you know, that shows up with his car. And it's just an old car, like it really doesn't belong in the car cruise. You know, he rolls in with his 1988 Plymouth K car, and he sits it right next to this sweet, like 69 Mustang in mint condition. And I'm thinking to myself, dude, that's just an old car. I mean, just because it works does not mean it belongs in the car show. You should have stayed in your lane. You know, I was in a boxing gym that I like to hang out at and work out a little bit a few months ago, and there were a few guys there training for the Golden Gloves tournament. And you probably think you know where you're going, but you don't, where I'm going, but you don't on this one. So there's guys, and they're looking for sparring partners to give them a few rounds of work to prepare for the Golden Gloves. And there's this one guy in the gym, sort of a heavyweight, about my size, and he wanted to see if there was 5 guys in the gym that would go 2 rounds with him so he could get 10 straight rounds of work in. And I'm thinking, you know, 2 rounds, right? And you know, I look over at my coach, you know, and I got my gloves on, and I'm like hitting a bag, and I'm like, so I look at him, I said, what do you think? Can I do that? And without even hesitation, at the top of his lungs, no. He says, listen here, Padre. Because he calls me that because he knows I'm a pastor. He says, listen here, Padre, I don't want to explain your death to your wife. So, in other words, what he was saying is stay in your lane, right? You get where I'm going with this. There are times that it's important to stay in your lane physically, financially, emotionally. But over these next 4 weeks, our hope and our challenge to you is to encourage you maybe to get out of your lane spiritually. My hope is that at some time in this series, you will possibly put your turn signal on. You will look over your left shoulder, and you will change lanes. And let me say this right up front. This is going to be a series that some of you are not going to like. This is not a 3 points and a poem series, okay? This is a series that's going to be tough, and at times, I believe that's what we need to do. There are times for encouraging, uplifting, God loves you sermon, but as your pastor, there are also times that I need to push you, me, all of us to change lanes. When someone asks you about the teachings at Northway, my hope would be that you would say they're biblical, they're solid teachings, sermons, they're engaging. I would hope you would also say demanding. If you're looking for someone to tell you that you are just perfect the way you are, then you can find enough of that smiling sunshine and rainbows preaching on TV Sunday mornings. DVR that and watch it when you get home for a little lift. But this is going to be some tough stuff. Are you ready? Oakland, are you nodding your heads right now? Other campuses, huh? Are you ready for this? Let's dig in to a passage. And in the next 20 minutes, I'm going to go pretty fast, pretty hard. I hope you're tracking with me. We are going to be in Luke 4. It's in your notes in the outline. It's also, I'm going to be in Isaiah 61. And I'm sort of going to bounce back and forth between those two. So I put the entire text in there. They'll be up on the screens. Jesus has just been baptized. He's been tempted by Satan in the desert for 40 days. He's apparently done some teaching and healings in the town of Capernaum, and now he returns to his hometown of Nazareth, you know, a small, insignificant town in the middle of nowhere. And this is important. Catch me on this. From the studying that I've been doing, Nazareth at this time most likely would have been what is referred to as a settlement town. There would have been a group of devout Jewish believers and followers there living under Roman rule, but sticking rigidly to the law, to their faith, digging in hard on what they believe. But there were also would have been settlers there, non-Jews, Gentiles, and this would have not sat well with the Jewish population. They would have despised them for being in their region. They would have longed for the promised age to come, the long-awaited return of the Messiah, who would come in power and vengeance and reclaim their land from these Gentile dogs. And in Luke 14:16, it tells us that Jesus is about to preach a sermon in his hometown church. He's chosen a text to speak about. The text very deliberately talks about how he stands up. He asks for the scroll from the prophet Isaiah. So that's where he's going to read from and teach from. It says that he unrolls it. And this would have been a large scroll. Like, think of a large piece of wallpaper, long before chapters and verses. So when you whirled this thing out, it was just words. And he would have known what he was looking for to read. So he looks for the spot that he wants to teach from, and you can imagine sort of all eyes are upon him. Verse 18, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and the recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And then deliberately it talks about how he rolls the scroll back up, gives it to the attendant. You can almost picture this. He sits down, and then this amazing line, today, this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing. Folks, that would have been like a lightning bolt just went off in this room. He just announced that the promised age was indeed upon them, and that the Messiah that they had long been waiting for is himself. And if you know this passage, if you've ever read this passage before, you know just in a few seconds, the crowd is going to turn hostile against him. I mean, they are going to be steaming mad, drag him, chase him outside, and hope to throw him off a cliff. Why? Why? Let me unpack this just a little bit with you. Jesus is teaching, again, from the book of Isaiah, chapter 61, verses 1 and 2. And all of the devout Jews in that room, in that church, they would have known this verse. In fact, this would have been a battle cry text for them. They would have loved this text. They may have mumbled this text under their breath to those Gentiles that were farming their land and prospering in their region. So go back, look at Isaiah 61. In verse 2, Jesus does something very intentional here. He leaves off the second part of the verse. If you look at this, he says, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. If you remember, I told you, he said that. He put a period there. He went and sat down. He left off, and the day of vengeance of our God to comfort all who mourn. In fact, when you look at Isaiah 2 through 7, you can see that this is a text, and it's in your notes, about judgment and wrath on the same very people that had settled in their land. Look down at verse 5. Strangers, they're talking about these Gentiles that would have been in the time of Isaiah, that would have been in their land, shall stand and tend your flocks. Foreigners shall be your plowmen and vine dressers. But you shall be called the priest of the Lord, and they shall speak of you as the ministers of our God. So there's what he's saying in this Isaiah text. It's like, these folks, they're going to serve you someday. The wealth of the nation, you will have it. This is a vengeful wrath, vindication text. And Jesus, he's turned it from a text of judgment to a text of mercy, from a text of wrath to a text of compassion. Well, one commentary that I read said that every person sort of in the room that day would have been thinking something along these lines. What is the matter with this boy? He has just quoted one of our favorite texts, but he's omitted the most important verses. He speaks so powerfully, but this is outrageous. The age of the Messiah is a promised age of vengeance on them. And this is Joseph's boy, right? He should have known better. He grew up around here. And the crowd is steaming. And this would have been like someone getting up on Penguin game day and preaching compassion about the Flyers, right? This would have been on Steeler game day, calling us to rally around the Browns. Come to think of it, I think that actually happened up here once, and it didn't go over so well. Jesus is seated, right? And he's asking calmly. He's introducing a new plan to them. He's asking those in attendance to consider what? Changing lanes. See, he's saying to follow me, you must be engaged in justice, advocacy, and compassion for the poor, the brokenhearted, the oppressed, the captives, for everyone. And then just to throw gas on the fire, he goes on to tell two Old Testament stories. In verse 24, back in Luke 4 now, and he said, truly I say to you, no prophet is acceptable in his hometown. But in truth, I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in those days of Elijah, when the heavens were shut up 3 years and 6 months, and a great famine came over the land, and Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to Zarephath, the land of Sidon, to a woman who was a widow. End of that story. He shifts quickly to another story from the book of Kings. And there were many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed, but only Naaman the Syrian. I won't go into all the detail of this with you or pull it apart, but these are two stories of Old Testament Gentile heroes that had three things in common. They were authentic. They authentically believed in God. They walked in trust, even though they were Gentiles, and they acted on their faith. He could have chosen David. He could have chosen Moses to talk about here, to make his point, but instead, what's he do? He's clearly knew the town's agenda, and he knew these stories would confront the congregation. But he chose to tell them anyhow, and the room explodes in anger. When they heard these things, all in the synagogue were filled with wrath. And they rose up and drove him out of the town and brought him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built so they could throw him down the cliff. I read a dozen commentaries. And really no explanation here outside of the Holy Spirit's upon him. But passing through their midst, he went away. Powerful text. You know, back in the middle of March, I preached on Nehemiah 5. If you were here that weekend, it's in the midst of the walls of Jerusalem being rebuilt, facing overwhelming threats. Nehemiah was leading this construction process with a shovel in one hand and a sword in the other. And I told you in the particular chapter that weekend, 3 cries rose up from the poor in Jerusalem. One, they were starving and without hope. 2, the worst part of it, the part that truly broke their heart, was that they were doing it to one another. This is countrymen oppressing fellow countrymen. And the last part, tragically, because of the debt and the situations they were in, many of them had to sell their own children into captivity or slavery. And I received more feedback about that sermon than I had from others in a long, long time. And there was one really prevalent theme, and then a couple other things I want to address. But the one prevalent theme was people were stirred to do something about the poor, the brokenhearted, those in need. They actually asked for more teaching on it. What can we do? I want to do something. And then a couple other things. Some were troubled, if you remember that I used the word social justice back then on that weekend. They said that it's a term that's closely linked and associated with a socialistic, communist political viewpoint, a sort of shared wealth attitude. And then also, I even got asked one time whether we were going to become a social gospel church. And the social gospel, if you know, it's defined basically as a church or a movement that ignores or lessens Jesus' salvation gospel and focuses nearly entirely on addressing social problems of the world. So let me address, quickly and directly. As far as the social gospel, no. Emphatic, no. There is nothing, in my opinion, that is more precious to Jesus. In fact, I heard one of our elders say this morning at a meeting, and I totally, wholeheartedly agree. There is nothing more precious, I think, to Jesus than when somebody yields their heart and accepts an invitation, and he knows that he has eternity now with that person. We will always present the gospel of Jesus Christ, and we are not going to become a social gospel church. But as far as the social justice term, Timothy Keller, author, pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church in Manhattan, conservative, about as non-controversial Presbyterian as they come. He wrote a book, one of his books, Reason for God, which many of you have been reading along and studying with Pastor Jay. In his book called Generous Justice, it says this: the Bible is a book devoted to justice in the world from first to last. And the Bible gives us not just a naked call to care about justice, but gives us everything we need: motivation, guidance, inner joy, and power to live a just life. Folks, social justice is a major theme throughout the entire Bible. Throughout the Old Testament, it is talked about. The book of Deuteronomy has entire sections dedicated to systems and processes for caring for those in need. The prophets almost all implored it. Micah 6:8. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice? Amos 5:24. But let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like an overflowing stream. Moving to the New Testament, Jesus in Matthew 5:3. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. I could cite to you 300 or 400 support verses about justice in the Bible. Next to money and the kingdom, it is what Jesus talked about more than anything else. We have to confront the fact that the term social justice, I think in some cases, has been hijacked by some, frankly, in culture and in the church that have ulterior motives and have differing agendas at work. That is not what we are about. In this series, I want to unpack and help us be transformed by what Jesus had to say about social justice, not what some of the culture of the times would have us believe it is. We are stressing the need to reclaim justice, and that's why we called this series Reclaiming Justice. And digging into Jesus' teachings, I believe this is a crucial topic for the American church, and we have got to get it right. People are looking for us to see how we are caring for those in need, and that's what we're going to do for the next 3 weeks. Pastor Doug will be here next week to talk about the poor. I will be back in the following week to talk about the brokenhearted, and then Freedom will bat cleanup and address setting the captives free. Here are a couple things this series is not aimed at. This is not about giving to the church. So we will not be talking about tithing in this series. This is not about trying to make you feel guilty for what you have accomplished or what you have acquired. We are not going to implore you that if you have much, that you're a sinner if you don't give it all away. That's not where we're going, but here is where we're going. Jesus, in his first publicly recorded sermon in his hometown, takes on a heated political and spiritual topic and almost gets thrown off a cliff. I am hoping that an angry mob doesn't throw me, Doug, or Freedom off of Mount Washington following the close of this series, but please hear me. We are going to tackle it. Jesus said he intended to reach out to the poor with good news. He was being sent to set the captives free, to heal the blind, to give hope to those that are oppressed and beaten down. If it was important enough for him to make it his first recorded public sermon, I believe we ought to pay attention to it. In his last statement, he says to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. He puts a period there instead of a comma. He omits all the vengeance and wrath stuff. The year of the Lord's favor. What is he referring to? What does that mean? See, folks, the year of the Lord's favor, it's this ancient, sort of in revered Bible system and celebration, dating back to the times of Moses, called the year of Jubilee. It's back to the golden age of Israel's existence. And it says this, that every 50 years was to be set aside as the year of Jubilee, or the year, it's also translated the year of the Lord's favor. Now get this, it is an opportunity to give everyone a chance to recover, to get back on their own 2 feet, and to be blessed with a new start. The year of Jubilee, or the year of the Lord's favor, it was a time of redemption for a family, a redemption of land and of the people. If you had fallen on hard times, right, and had to sell your land, or even worse yet, in that period of time, if you had fallen on hard times and had to place your family, yourself, your children into slavery, come the 50th year, it was like a big reset button was being pressed. Restoration, release, freedom, all the land, status, return to the original owner. Those that had fallen on hard times, made some mistakes, caught some bad breaks, were restored. What a deal. Could you imagine a system like that in our current world? Seriously, this was real. You know, I can't even get my mind around that. So I take over someone's land or house, property or business because they no longer could afford it. They fell on some bad times, made some mistakes, and then whenever the 50th year rolls around, I've got to give it all back to the original owners? How could they do this? How did this actually make sense back then? Because they understood everything was truly God's in the first place. Truly. That was not lip service to them. They considered all land, all possessions, a divine gift from God. You know, and you have probably heard people say this, or maybe you've even said something similar to it. Hey, everything I own, it's God's. Well, back in this system, on the 50th year, it was reality. You weren't just saying it. Jesus sits down in front of them that day and proclaims the year of the Lord's favor. He's saying to them, it's Jubilee time, but it's not about land. It's not about stuff. What is he actually saying is the ultimate Jubilee, the true once and final year of the Lord's favor has been fulfilled, and he's sitting right in front of you. And it's not about vengeance or wrath, it's about mercy and grace. And those of you that have fallen on hard times, made some mistakes, caught a few bad breaks, the poor, the brokenhearted, the captives. I have come to set you free. This series is not about putting you on some kind of a guilt trip. This series is about the responsibility that comes with God's favor and encouraging you to consider getting out of your lane. The year of the Lord's favor. I want to close with just talking about favor briefly. God's favor. Favor of God is not a formula. The favor of God is not a set of steps that you take to get what you want. The favor of God is a living and breathing dynamic of being in relationship with Jesus Christ that changes the way you see God and the way you think God sees you. See, I think, for the most part, we all understand that God loves us, right? He sort of has to. Follow me on this. If we believe in him, then he says he forgives us of our sin and that we spend eternity with him. It's sort of like a contract, right? I find it hard at times believing, or I guess I believe at times that God got the bad end of that contract with me, right? But from what I read in the Bible, that's not the case. He did not just get suckered into this deal. He wanted it. Jesus' work on the cross means he wants to show us great favor. Favor is a byproduct of the mercy of God. What does walking in God's favor look like? Are you walking right now in the favor of God? What does it look like? I think it looks like even if you're seeking an answer and you cannot seem to get the solution to it, even if right now you really need something desperately in your life, but it does not seem to be happening. When you're walking in God's favor, it's about his presence. It's not about what happens to me. Instead, it's all about who I know is with me no matter what happens to me. I do not have to know where I'm going. As long as I know who I'm with, that is God's favor. In the valleys and in the wilderness of life, I have favor. In the celebrations and joys of life, I have favor because I know who I'm with. Do you want favor in your life? Do you at times, though, feel like something is missing? There doesn't seem to be a plan, a purpose, a blessing in your life. Do right now you feel like you need a little jubilee, a little hit the reset button? Then hear me on this. Do something for the poor, the brokenhearted, and the captive. When it comes to this topic, Jesus is in the left lanes, folks. There is no doubt about it. He is in the left lanes. You want to get wet, go outside when it's raining. You want to get wet with God's favor, get involved in a ministry of mercy and compassion and do something for someone in need. That is where we're going in this series. And I'm praying, and the teaching team has been praying, that over these next 3 weeks, it will not be about a guilt trip, but rather the responsibility that comes with having God's favor. Folks, have you ever thought to yourself, someday when things settle down a little bit, when I just get set up a little bit better, when I get a little bit better foundation under me, oh yeah, then I'm going to start considering and thinking about how I might jump in and doing something for those in need. Now is the time. In all truthfulness, when is the last time that you seriously sacrifice something for someone in need? Do you feel like God is with you? You may know he loves you, But do you really feel like he's with you? His favor is resting upon you, in your heart, in your soul. Do you feel like you have a clear plan and a purpose in your life? And if you do you feel like God is with you in it? Jesus says what is important to him in his first public sermon, and he leaves out what is not important. And then he talks about the year of favor. He lets them know it's sitting right in front of them. Over the next 3 weekends, I would encourage you to come with an open mind, because I believe God will place something on your heart that he wants to do for someone in need, and that you are wired up specifically to do and meet that need. I'm going to have each campus sort of leader and director at all of our campus sort of step up into this moment right now. So if that person on your campus could come up, and why don't everybody at all campuses just stand up with me for a moment.